face are untruthful.
President Bush is being pounded with calls for an independent investigation into how U.S. intelligence so badly misjudged Iraq's capabilities before the war.
Having the president holding all the cards, appointing all the people, having everybody accountable to him is a very bad idea.
If you say you're going to war because he has weapons of mass destruction, and you don't find those weapons, it is not persuasive to jump to a second argument. Well, that didn't work, but here I've got a second explanation. I was asked if I would care to try to operationalize some of the comments I'd made about what was going wrong in Iraq. And so I said, if you, among other things, that if you're going to do this, you had to treat it like an intelligence problem, and that is not go looking for hidden weapons, but going looking for the people who would be associated with hidden weapons. Well, what I did is I formed teams for each of the areas, and we formally had hypotheses. Half the teams took a hypothesis that it was there, the other half said it wasn't there, and both followed exactly the same method. If you believe it's there, what is the proof that will, in fact, prove that hypothesis, or what evidence clashes with it? Same thing is true with the teams that took the hypothesis it wasn't there, is, collecting evidence. So yeah, you start with a viewpoint, a hypothesis, an academic would say, and you collect the evidence that will support our challenge. You tell them, go form and discuss with your team a hypothesis and get a strategy for doing it. And I just, I was unsure whether they would come back pro or con. And I really didn't care. And that was intentional because I didn't want to be seen as stacking the deck. And we met every Saturday afternoon, and each team went through a very, it was rigorous, but almost predictable. You started with, here's our hypothesis, here's what we've done this week, here's how the evidence stacks, here's what we propose to do the next week. And there would be a discussion between the groups and myself on each of them of what they were doing. A lot of cross-fertilization. There's a gradual buildup of evidence that forces you to challenge your pre-existing belief and then keeps generating either more questions or generates questions about the hypothesis. For example, give you a real case. One of the first things that worried me was we had a big army running through Iraq in March and April. WMD was not used against them, nor was it found. That's sort of remarkable if they had had large stockpiles. I really believe in the jungle telegraph. Put the word out on the street. Let people know what you're about and what you have to offer, and usually you'll get people coming to you. And I had a lot of money, reward money, and I had green cards or passports to virtually any attractive place in the world. You come to us with weapons of mass destruction, evidence about the weapons, and we'll take care of you. All I had coming to me were fabricators, people who said it but didn't have anything, had absolutely no evidence. Iraq was a horrible place in June, July, August, September, October, November. Insecurity, the economy wasn't working, there was violence, there's still violence there. It was remarkable to me and disturbing that in a place this bad, who wouldn't want a golden lifeboat to get out? All they had to do is come with information. I would protect their identity. It was clear to everyone. I would take their whole family. It wasn't a case, you have to leave your family behind. You'll be taken care of, but you'll have to find a new family in California. Well, some of them might like to. But no one bought. And so that worried me. Around a weapons program, if a weapons program exists, you're going to find people engaged in the production, the technology, engineering, design, people involved in protecting the weapons, people involved in moving them, and people involved in preparing to use the weapons. We found none of that. We were running into fewer and fewer leads that looked profitable, and a lot of evidence that stacked up to explain something other than large stockpiles of weapons. I had the habit of writing a personal report back every weekend, which was quite separate than the official reports back saying, this is what it looks, smells like to me. Here are the issues of the week. Here's how I'm proposing I've always found that's a good way to keep people informed of what you're doing. I don't think there was a surprise about the conclusions I was drawing because those were fully and I think completely and adequately reported. I think the surprise would be that you would speak out and say that. I had the privilege, although I didn't always think it was a privilege, of watching a lot of very senior government officials come to agonizing terms about Vietnam and decide not to speak out because they knew they'd never be asked to lunch again. They wouldn't be part of the process. And I think like a lot of people of my age and my generation who were in the government, it's by no means unique to me, just decided that if ever the occasion came, I simply wasn't going to live like that. There wasn't a lunch or part of a process that was important enough.
This committee has a special responsibility to the men and women of our armed forces to look at the pre-war intelligence, because planning for military operations is based on intelligence.
Policymakers take data, they interpret threat, they assess risk.
When you talk about a mushroom cloud, how much more imminent threat could there be?
Skepticism left out of the public white paper of the CIA?
Many of us feel that the evidence so far leads only to one conclusion: that what has happened was more than a failure of intelligence. It was the result of manipulation of the intelligence to justify a decision to go to war.
Secret societies have their own rules, and secret societies generally don't feel an obligation to openly and democratically communicate.
Prime Minister Blair has set up a similar commission in Great Britain.
Yeah.
His is going to report back in July.
Right.
Ours is not going to be until March of 2005, 5 months after the presidential election.
Yeah.
Shouldn't the American people have the benefit of the commission before the election?
Well, the reason why we gave it time is because we didn't want it to be hurried. This was a strategic look, kind of a big picture look about the intelligence gathering capacities of the United States of America.
I think every president should have kept on their desk the statement, the carved statement that Harry Truman had: the buck stops here.
If there are no weapons of mass destruction, which there aren't, if there are no ties with Al-Qaeda, which there weren't and which there aren't, or maybe now there are, then why do we go to war? Well, all you need do is go on the web and download Project for a New American Century. There you will find the ideological and the strategic underpinnings for this policy, which was rejected by George Bush I, which was ridiculed out of town in those days, but became the avowed policy of this government and was implemented starting with the war.
I felt in my last year in the Pentagon that I felt there was a great deal of contempt for the constraints on government that our Constitution lays out. And I also felt that there was a contempt for the Constitution, and I only absorbed this sense of contempt by association with some of these senior appointed civilians.
Who are all neoconservatives, who all believe in dominance, who believe in preemption, who believe in the military option as the first resort rather than the last resort.
They have had a very fixed, indeed almost obsessive idea that in fact Iraq is a major actor in the world and a probable threat, possibly a deadly threat to the United States.
This is a group of people who have essentially believed that might makes right, that the United States at this stage of history has unchallengeable power and therefore a responsibility to use it to make the world over in the manner that we, or they rather, think it ought to be made over.
I think behind the basic neoconservative philosophy is a considerable arrogance that American interests are the primary goal of all American foreign policy.
And they seem to have a really serious habit of not being interested in listening to what other people say about this subject.
Now, of course, American interests should matter, but there are enlightened and unenlightened elements of self-interest. And I think in this case, we have determined and defined our interests globally in almost total disregard of what other states want, what their concerns are, how they might or might not be able to contribute. We're on a roll, you're either with us or get out of the way. I find remarkably little interest in the character of other countries, the nature of their problems and difficulties. This is boring, I think, to neoconservatives who really